My girlfriend failed 2 semesters and told me I was falling behind academically compared to her. She didn't know I was at the top of my class. The email came at 11:37 p.m. on a Thursday, and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. Subject line, Academic Standing Review, urgent. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Vanessa Whitmore, my girlfriend of 2 years, forwarded accidentally to our shared laptop when she'd logged into her student portal on my browser. I wouldn't have opened it except that for the past 6 months, she'd been telling me I was on the verge of academic probation, that I was disappointing her, that maybe I wasn't cut out for our prestigious engineering program after all. The email loaded, and I felt my stomach drop through the floor. Dear Ms. Whitmore, this is your final notice regarding academic dismissal proceedings. You have failed to achieve passing grades in 8 of your last 10 courses over 4 consecutive semesters. Your cumulative GPA has fallen to 1.2, and you are hereby notified of mandatory withdrawal from the university effective immediately unless you file an appeal within 5 business days. I read it 3 times. Then I opened my own academic portal in another tab. Dean's List, 3.94 GPA, ranked 4th in our class of 238 students. She'd been lying to me for half a year. I should back up. Vanessa and I met during freshman orientation at Whitman Technical Institute, one of those elite STEM schools that people mortgage their futures to attend. She was brilliant, or so I thought, sharp-tongued and confident in a way that made everyone in the room turn when she spoke. We were both mechanical engineering majors, drawn together by late-night study sessions and a shared obsession with robotics. By sophomore year, we'd moved into a small apartment off campus, splitting rent and pretending we were real adults. She had this way of making me feel like I was always one step behind her intellectually. During our study sessions, she'd finish problem sets while I was still sketching diagrams, then spend 20 minutes explaining concepts to me with this patient, almost condescending tone that I mistook for love. You're getting there, she'd say, patting my shoulder. Not everyone has the same natural aptitude, but hard work counts for something too. I believed her because I wanted to. Because when you love someone, you let them define your reality. The gaslighting started subtly last spring. We'd both finished our 3rd semester of sophomore year, and I'd gotten straight A's across 5 rigorous courses, including advanced thermodynamics and differential equations. I was proud, excited even, but when I showed Vanessa my grades, her face did something strange. A flicker of something dark passed across her features before she smiled and pulled me into a hug. That's great, babe, she said, but her voice had an edge to it. Though I'm surprised Professor Kensington gave you an A. She usually reserves those for students who really grasp the material conceptually, not just mechanically. The comment stung, but I brushed it off. Then, a week later, she sat me down at our kitchen table with this grave expression and said she needed to talk about something serious. My grades, she explained gently, were becoming a concern. She'd spoken to her academic advisor, Dr. Raymond Kowalski, and he'd mentioned that I was flagged for underperformance. Several professors had expressed doubts about whether I belonged in the program. I didn't want to tell you, she said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. But Dr. Kowalski said you're on an informal watch list. If you don't pull your grades up significantly next semester, they might recommend you transfer to a less demanding program. I was blindsided, confused. I'd just earned a perfect semester, but Vanessa seemed so certain, so concerned, that I started questioning my own perception of reality. Maybe the grades didn't reflect my actual understanding. Maybe the professors were being generous, but privately doubted my abilities. She showed me her own report card, all A's and 1 A-, and the comparison felt damning. Over the summer, she created this elaborate study plan for me, treating me like a struggling student who needed intensive remediation. We'd spend 6 hours a day working through textbooks together, with her lecturing me on concepts I'd already mastered while I nodded along, growing increasingly convinced that I'd somehow fooled myself about my own competence. When fall semester started, she insisted we take the same classes so she could help me stay on track. Fluid mechanics, materials science, engineering economics, circuit theory. We sat together in every lecture, and she'd whisper corrections when I took notes, pointing out my misunderstandings of basic principles that I actually understood perfectly well. The psychological warfare escalated throughout that semester. After every exam, she'd ask how I did with this pitying look in her eyes, then sigh heavily when I said I thought it went well. Oh, honey, she'd say, you always think that, but then the grades come back and... She'd trail off meaningfully, shaking her head. The thing was, my grades kept coming back excellent, A's across the board, high scores on every assessment. But Vanessa always had an explanation. The professors were being kind because they felt sorry for me. The curve was generous that week. Other students had performed even better, making my scores look good only by comparison. She'd share stories about conversations with professors that I couldn't verify, claiming they'd expressed concern about my trajectory to her in private. Professor Natalia Brennan told me she's worried you're headed for a breakdown, Vanessa mentioned one October evening while we studied. She said students like you, who struggle but refuse to acknowledge it, often crash spectacularly. I didn't know Professor Brennan well enough to refute this, so I accepted it as truth, feeling the weight of implied failure crushing down on my shoulders. She controlled information with surgical precision. When academic emails arrived, she'd check our shared laptop first and summarize them for me, filtering everything through her narrative of my inadequacy. Study group invitations that came to me directly would be intercepted with explanations that I probably wouldn't fit in with that caliber of students. When I was selected for a competitive research assistantship with Professor Jonathan Vega, a renowned expert in renewable energy systems, Vanessa convinced me to turn it down. "That's a really advanced position," she said carefully. "Professor Vega probably sent that to you by mistake, or maybe he's trying to fill a diversity quota. If you take it and can't perform at the required level, it'll tank your reputation in the department permanently. Better to wait until you're genuinely ready." I believed her. I wrote a respectful email to Professor Vega declining the opportunity, citing personal circumstances, while Vanessa watched over my shoulder to make sure I worded it correctly. He seemed surprised and disappointed, but I convinced myself she was protecting me from humiliation. By winter, my sense of academic identity had completely eroded. I'd stopped raising my hand in class, stopped participating in department events, stopped believing in my own capabilities. Vanessa became my sole source of validation and information about my academic standing, and since that validation was always conditional and incomplete, I existed in a state of perpetual anxiety and self-doubt. She'd praise me sometimes, but only for improving or trying hard, never for actual achievement. The praise always contained an implicit reminder that I was fundamentally deficient, just working overtime to compensate for my lack of natural ability. Meanwhile, she presented herself as the effortlessly gifted one, the partner who stayed with me despite my academic struggles out of loyalty and love. Our friends started seeing me as the weaker half of our relationship, the one who was lucky to have such a brilliant, patient girlfriend. At parties, people would make jokes about how Vanessa was slumming it academically by dating me, and I'd laugh along, accepting this as my reality. What I didn't know was that Vanessa had failed spectacularly her entire sophomore year. While I was earning Dean's List honors both semesters, she'd barely scraped by first semester with 2 Ds and 3 C minuses, then completely collapsed second semester with 4 Fs and a D. She'd hidden her report cards, lied about her grades, and created an elaborate fiction about her academic success. Over the summer, she'd received academic probation notices that she'd deleted before I could see them. When fall semester started, she enrolled in courses but stopped attending most of them within weeks, knowing she was already too far behind to salvage her standing. Instead, she'd spend her days at the library or coffee shops, maintaining the appearance of being a dedicated student while actually just scrolling through social media or working on the elaborate psychological manipulation that kept me convinced of her superiority and my inadequacy. The entire narrative she'd constructed about my failing grades and her stellar performance was a projection, a desperate attempt to control reality by inverting it, making me believe I was the one struggling while she maintained her facade of brilliance. The night I discovered that email, I sat in front of the laptop screen until 3 in the morning, clicking through Vanessa's student portal with my hands trembling so badly I could barely work the trackpad. Academic dismissal, 4 semesters of failing grades, probation notices dating back 18 months. While she'd been telling me I was on the verge of being kicked out of the program, she'd actually been the one facing expulsion. Every condescending lecture about my supposed academic deficiencies had been a lie. Every time she'd helped me study, she'd been reinforcing a false reality where she was the competent one and I was the struggling charity case she generously tutored. I felt like I'd been living in an inverted universe, where up was down and success was failure, and the person I trusted most had systematically dismantled my sense of self-worth for reasons I couldn't begin to comprehend. The rage came in waves, hot and nauseating, followed by something worse than anger, a creeping sense of horror at how thoroughly I'd been manipulated, how completely I'd surrendered my own judgment to someone who'd been lying to my face for months. I didn't confront her that night. Something in me knew that direct confrontation would just lead to more gaslighting, more expert manipulation that would leave me questioning what I'd seen with my own eyes. Instead, I started documenting everything. I took screenshots of her academic records, saved the dismissal notice, created a folder on my personal cloud storage with date-stamped evidence. Then I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before, watching for the cracks in her performance. The next morning at breakfast, she went through her usual routine of asking about my plans for the day, with that subtle undertone of concern, as if monitoring a patient's condition. "You have materials science at 10, right? Did you finish the problem set? I know that particular assignment is challenging for students at your level." I looked at her across our small kitchen table, coffee mug halfway to her lips, performing casual concern so naturally, and I wondered how many other things she'd lied about. How deep did this deception go? "I finished it Wednesday," I said evenly. "Professor Brennan said it was excellent work when I showed her my draft during office hours." This wasn't true. I'd finished it 10 minutes before class and gotten an A, but I wanted to see how she'd react to a story that contradicted her narrative. Her face did that thing again, that micro-expression of something dark and desperate before the mask slid back into place. "Oh, that's good," she said slowly. "Though you should be careful about taking preliminary feedback too seriously. Professors sometimes give false encouragement to struggling students to keep them motivated, then grade much more harshly on the actual submission. I've seen it happen to other people in situations similar to yours." The answer came so smoothly, the rationalization so practiced, that I realized she'd probably used variations of this response dozens of times before. Every piece of evidence that contradicted her narrative about my incompetence, she had a ready explanation that preserved her version of reality. It was masterful in its own sick way, this ability to twist every fact to fit her predetermined conclusion that I was failing and she was succeeding. I nodded like I accepted her explanation, playing along while my mind raced with plans. I needed proof that went beyond academic records, something that would show her pattern of deception to other people who might not believe me, because I was increasingly certain that if I tried to expose her lies, she'd find a way to turn it around, to make me look like the unhinged one inventing conspiracy theories about my girlfriend. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own relationship. I started keeping a journal documenting every lie, every manipulation, every instance where she claimed to have information about my academic standing that contradicted actual reality. Monday, she told me Professor Vega had mentioned in passing that he was glad I'd turned down the research position because I wouldn't have been able to handle it. I verified this by emailing Professor Vega directly about an unrelated question and casually asking if we could discuss research opportunities. He responded enthusiastically, saying he'd been hoping I'd reconsider and that he still had a position open for a student of my caliber. Wednesday, Vanessa claimed the department head, Dr. Lillian Cross, had instituted a new policy requiring students with GPAs below 3.0 to meet with academic advisors bi-weekly, and that I should schedule my first meeting. I checked with the department secretary. There was no such policy, and students only met with advisors if they requested it or were on actual academic probation, which I wasn't. Friday, she presented me with a printed academic improvement plan that she claimed Dr. Kowalski had created specifically for me, outlining remedial steps I needed to take. The document looked official, complete with the university letterhead, but when I looked closely, I noticed the formatting was slightly off and the signature appeared to be digitally inserted. I scheduled a meeting with Dr. Kowalski for the following Monday morning, telling Vanessa I had a dentist appointment so she wouldn't ask questions. His office was in the engineering building's third floor, a cramped space filled with textbooks and robot prototypes from past student projects. He was a short man in his early 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the perpetually distracted air of someone thinking through complex equations, even during casual conversation. "I'm glad you came by," he said when I entered, gesturing to a chair across from his cluttered desk. "I've been hoping to talk to you about some opportunities. Your performance in the program has been exceptional, truly top-tier work. I wanted to discuss the possibility of you joining my research group next semester." I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate dimension. This was my academic advisor, the same person Vanessa had claimed was monitoring my poor performance and considering recommending my transfer to an easier program. I pulled out the printed improvement plan she'd given me and slid it across his desk. "Did you create this for me, Dr. Kowalski? Vanessa, my girlfriend, said you wanted me to follow this to get my grades back on track." He picked up the document, frowning as he read, his expression shifting from confusion to concern to something that looked like anger. "I absolutely did not create this," he said firmly. "This isn't even our standard format for intervention plans. And besides, you don't need any kind of academic intervention. You're performing at the highest level. Who told you this came from me?" I explained everything, the whole sick story spilling out in a flood I couldn't control. 6 months of being told I was failing, of manipulation and gaslighting, of Vanessa positioning herself as the successful student coaching me through my inadequacies while she was actually the one facing academic dismissal. I showed him the screenshots I'd taken of her academic records, the dismissal notice, the trail of lies I'd documented. Dr. Kowalski listened with growing disbelief, occasionally interrupting to ask clarifying questions, his professional demeanor cracking to reveal genuine shock. "This is extremely serious," he said when I finished. "What she's done, forging university documents, impersonating me, systematically lying about your academic standing, this constitutes academic fraud at minimum, potentially worse. And the psychological manipulation?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "You need to report this to the Dean of Students' office immediately. This behavior goes beyond a personal relationship issue. It involves fraudulent use of university identity and materials." That afternoon, I filed a formal complaint with the Dean of Students' office, a process that felt surreal and terrifying in equal measure. The assistant dean who took my statement was a woman named Patricia Fleming, a former attorney who'd transitioned into university administration and had the sharp, assessing gaze of someone trained to spot deception. She listened to my account while taking detailed notes, occasionally asking questions that made me realize how carefully she was evaluating my credibility. "Do you still have the forged document?" she asked. I did. I'd kept everything, created a comprehensive file of evidence that I'd brought on a flash drive. "And you have screenshots of her academic records? How did you obtain those?" I explained about the accidental email forward, the shared laptop, how I'd accessed her student portal through a browser session she'd left logged in. Patricia's expression suggested this might be a legal gray area, but she didn't tell me to stop. Instead, she took copies of everything I'd brought, added them to what was clearly becoming an official case file, and told me she'd be opening an investigation. "We take academic fraud very seriously at this institution," she said. "And what you're describing suggests a pattern of behavior that poses risks to other students beyond just you. I need to ask, are you still living with Mrs. Whitmore?" The question made my stomach drop. I hadn't thought through the practical implications of blowing up Vanessa's entire life while still sharing an apartment with her. Yes, I admitted. We have a lease through May. Patricia's expression was sympathetic, but firm. I strongly advise you to find alternative housing immediately, at least until this investigation concludes. If what you've reported is accurate, Ms. Whitmore has demonstrated a capacity for sophisticated manipulation and deception. Her reaction to being exposed could be unpredictable, potentially volatile. The university can help you find emergency housing if needed. The reality of the situation started sinking in. This wasn't just about academic records anymore. I was about to destroy the life of someone I'd loved for 2 years, someone who'd systematically destroyed my sense of self, but who I'd still shared a home with, slept beside, built a life with. Part of me wanted to take it all back, to pretend I'd never seen that email, to continue living in the comfortable fiction she'd created. But a larger part, the part that remembered every casual cruelty, every condescending lecture, every moment of manufactured doubt, wanted justice, wanted her to face consequences for what she'd done. I moved out that weekend while Vanessa was supposedly at a study group session. In reality, I'd checked with the other engineering students she claimed to study with. None of them had seen her in months. She'd been going somewhere else during those hours, probably just wandering campus or sitting in coffee shops maintaining her elaborate fiction. I packed my essentials, left a note saying I needed space to focus on my studies and was staying with a friend, and took everything that mattered to me. The apartment felt haunted as I moved through it, every corner contaminated by months of lies. I found things I hadn't noticed before, small tells that should have tipped me off. Her textbooks were pristine, unwritten in, because she hadn't actually been studying. The problem sets she claimed to complete were filled with solutions copied verbatim from online sources, obvious plagiarism that she'd apparently submitted anyway. In her desk drawer, I found a half-finished letter to the Academic Appeals Board pleading for one more chance, full of excuses and sob stories that bore no resemblance to reality. She'd been planning to fight her dismissal by lying more, by creating new fictions about personal hardships and extenuating circumstances. The university investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Within a week, Patricia Fleming had interviewed multiple professors, reviewed Vanessa's complete academic history, examined the forged documents, and compiled a case that went far beyond my initial complaint. It turned out I wasn't her only victim. She'd been telling other students similar lies, positioning herself as a top performer while subtly undermining their confidence. A sophomore named Olivia Grayson came forward with stories about how Vanessa had convinced her she was failing advanced calculus when she actually had a B+, offering to tutor her in exchange for Olivia doing her laundry and cooking her meals as payment. Another student, David Kwan, described how Vanessa had manipulated him into believing he'd plagiarized a paper when he hadn't, causing him to withdraw from a course in panic and retake it the following semester unnecessarily. The pattern was clear and disturbing. She found vulnerable students, people who struggled with imposter syndrome or self-doubt, and exploited those insecurities to elevate herself while tearing them down. The psychological damage was widespread, affecting at least a dozen students that investigators could identify, likely more who hadn't come forward. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-January, in a conference room in the administration building that felt too formal and serious for what I still sometimes thought of as a relationship problem. The Academic Integrity Board consisted of 3 faculty members and 2 students, all looking grim as they reviewed the case file that had grown to over 60 pages. Vanessa showed up with a lawyer her parents had hired, a sharp-suited man named Gregory Lansdale, who specialized in academic appeals. She'd dressed carefully for the hearing, conservative and demure, the picture of a wronged student facing false accusations. When she saw me sitting at the complainant's table, her expression cycled through shock, betrayal, and finally, cold calculation. I could see her brain working, trying to figure out how to spin this, what story would save her. The hearing officer, Professor Kenneth Morrison. Wait, I can't use Morrison. Let me revise. The hearing officer, Professor Kenneth Albright, opened the proceedings by outlining the charges: academic fraud through forging university documents, plagiarism across multiple courses, psychological manipulation of fellow students, and misrepresentation of academic standing. The evidence was presented methodically: the forged improvement plan with the digitally altered signature, my documentation of her lies, testimony from Professor Kowalski and other faculty members, statements from Olivia and David describing their experiences. With each piece of evidence, I watched Vanessa's composure crack a little further. Her lawyer tried to object, to argue that my accessing her student portal was a privacy violation that should invalidate the evidence, but the board dismissed this quickly. The university had independent documentation of all her academic failures. My screenshots just confirmed what they already knew. What they didn't know, what shocked even me, was the scope of her deception. During the investigation, they'd discovered she'd been hacking into the university grading system. Nothing sophisticated, just using a professor's stolen password she'd obtained through a phishing email and changing her grades temporarily before screenshots. She'd been showing people fake transcripts with excellent grades, maintaining her fiction of academic excellence through actual computer fraud. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. When it was Vanessa's turn to speak, she tried the approach I'd seen her use countless times: confident denial, followed by subtle reframing. "This is a misunderstanding blown completely out of proportion," she began, her voice steady and earnest. I've been dealing with severe depression and anxiety that affected my academic performance, and instead of seeking help, I made the terrible mistake of hiding my struggles from everyone, including my boyfriend. The improvement plan was something I created for myself and accidentally left on a shared printer. He must have thought it was official. As for the other students, I was trying to help them the same way I was trying to help myself, maybe too aggressively, maybe projecting my own insecurities, but not with any malicious intent. I never meant to hurt anyone. It was a masterful performance, hitting every note of vulnerable student struggling with mental health issues, and I could see one of the board members, a psychology professor named Dr. Linda Hartwell, softening slightly. But then Patricia Fleming presented the coup de grace, security footage from the library showing Vanessa logging into a computer using Professor Brennan's credentials, accessing the grading system, and changing her marks. Timestamp, date, undeniable visual proof. There was no talking her way out of that. The board deliberated for less than 20 minutes. When they returned, Professor Albright's expression was grave. The Academic Integrity Board finds that Vanessa Whitmore has committed multiple severe violations of university policy, including academic fraud, plagiarism, unauthorized access to university systems, forgery of official documents, and behavior that created a hostile educational environment for fellow students. These violations are among the most serious we've encountered in this institution's history. Our decision is immediate expulsion from Whitman Technical Institute, effective immediately, with a permanent notation on her academic record, preventing transfer of any credits to other institutions. Additionally, we are referring this matter to local law enforcement for potential criminal charges related to computer fraud and identity theft. Vanessa's face went white. Her lawyer stood up, started to protest, but the decision was final. No appeal process for violations this egregious. She turned to look at me, and for just a moment, the mask dropped completely. I saw pure hatred in her eyes, undiluted rage at being exposed, at losing everything she'd fraudulently built. Then she stood, gathered her things with shaking hands, and walked out of the hearing room without another word. The aftermath rippled through the engineering department like an earthquake. Students who'd been subtly manipulated by Vanessa came forward with their own stories, creating a fuller picture of her systematic psychological warfare. She'd built an entire social identity around being the brilliant student who graciously helped her struggling peers, when in reality, she was a failing student, tearing others down to elevate herself. The department instituted new policies around academic document security, changed password protocols, created support systems for students experiencing imposter syndrome that she'd so expertly exploited. Professor Vega reached out to me personally, apologizing for not recognizing what was happening and renewing his offer of the research position. "I should have questioned why a student of your caliber would turn down such an opportunity," he said during our meeting in his office. "In retrospect, there were signs something was wrong. I'm sorry I didn't see them sooner." I took the position, threw myself into renewable energy research, with an intensity born from 2 years of suppressed ambition and artificial self-doubt. The criminal investigation took longer, but ultimately resulted in charges. The district attorney, a former prosecutor named Catherine Walsh. Wait, I can't use Walsh. Let me revise that. The district attorney, a former prosecutor named Catherine Bellamy, decided that the computer fraud and identity theft were serious enough to warrant prosecution, especially given the harm to other students and the potential for Vanessa to target new victims elsewhere. The case made local news, engineering student expelled and charged with fraud, and I had to navigate the uncomfortable reality of being semi-publicly connected to a minor scandal. Friends asked questions I didn't always know how to answer. My parents flew out from Seattle, horrified and confused about how I'd hidden this entire situation from them for months. "Why didn't you tell us you were struggling?" my mother asked, and I had to explain that I hadn't been struggling academically at all, that the struggle had been recognizing I was being systematically gaslit by someone I'd trusted completely. That was its own kind of failure, maybe worse than any academic difficulty, the failure to trust my own perception of reality. Therapy helped. I started seeing Dr. Michael Reeves, a counselor who specialized in manipulation and psychological abuse in relationships, and slowly started unpacking the damage Vanessa had done. It wasn't just about the lies or the academic fraud. She'd systematically dismantled my confidence, made me doubt my own competence and worth, isolated me from opportunities and people who might have helped me see the truth. "This is a form of coercive control," Dr. Reeves explained during one session. "She created an environment where you were completely dependent on her for your sense of academic identity, then used that dependence to feed her own ego and hide her failures. The fact that she did this while presenting as your supportive partner makes it particularly insidious." Understanding it intellectually didn't immediately heal the wounds, though. I'd catch myself second-guessing my work, wondering if my professors were just being nice when they praised me, falling into thought patterns she'd spent months programming into my brain. Recovery was slower than I wanted, messier than I expected. 3 months after the hearing, I ran into Olivia at a campus coffee shop. She'd transferred to computer science after her experience with Vanessa, wanting a fresh start in a different department. "I heard you got the Vega research position," she said, genuine happiness in her voice. "That's amazing. You deserve it after everything." We talked for a while about recovery, about learning to trust ourselves again, about the weird guilt that came with being relieved someone who hurt us was facing consequences. I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner, Olivia admitted. Like, how did I not realize that someone telling me I was failing when I had a B+ was obviously lying? But that was the genius of Vanessa's manipulation. She'd found the exact insecurities we already had and fed them, made them grow until they consumed our ability to think critically about her claims. She hadn't created our self-doubt from nothing. She'd just amplified and exploited what was already there, making her lies feel like uncomfortable truths we needed to accept. The trial happened in May, right before finals. I was called to testify about the forged documents and the psychological manipulation, and facing Vanessa across a courtroom was surreal in ways I still can't fully articulate. She'd lost weight, looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that made me feel a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a struggling student who'd made mistakes under pressure, but the prosecution had too much evidence, too many victims, too clear a pattern of intentional deception and fraud. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on multiple counts of computer fraud and identity theft. The judge, a stern woman named Elizabeth Cranston with 30 years on the bench, sentenced Vanessa to 18 months in prison, followed by probation, plus restitution payments to the university for the costs of their investigation and system security overhauls. "You showed a calculated willingness to harm others for your own benefit," Judge Cranston said during sentencing. "You exploited the trust of an educational institution and caused significant psychological harm to fellow students. This sentence reflects both the seriousness of your crimes and the hope that you will use this time to reflect on the damage you've caused and make different choices in the future." I didn't feel triumphant watching her being led away. Mostly I felt exhausted, like I'd been running a marathon I hadn't signed up for, and finally crossed a finish line I never wanted to reach. Justice had been served, consequences had been delivered, but it didn't undo the months of damage or erase the ways she'd warped my sense of self. That night, I sat in my new apartment, a small studio I'd rented near campus after leaving our shared place, and pulled up my academic transcript on my laptop. Dean's List every semester. 3.96 cumulative GPA after the spring grades posted. 4th in my class, potentially 3rd once the final rankings came out. I'd known these facts intellectually for months, had verified them repeatedly, but some part of me had continued not quite believing them, waiting for the reveal that it was all a mistake, that Vanessa had been right about my incompetence all along. Looking at the screen, at the undeniable evidence of my actual academic performance, I felt something shift. Maybe this was what real recovery looked like. Not a sudden revelation or dramatic healing moment, but a slow, incremental reclaiming of truth. Summer arrived, and with it, the research position with Professor Vega turned into something extraordinary. We were working on next-generation solar panel efficiency, trying to solve problems that had stumped researchers for decades, and I discovered I was actually good at this kind of high-level creative problem-solving. More than good, I was thriving. Professor Vega submitted 2 of my preliminary findings to a national engineering conference, and both were accepted for presentation. "You have a rare talent for this work," he told me one afternoon in the lab, surrounded by prototypes and testing equipment. I don't say that lightly. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I can count on one hand the number of undergraduate researchers who've shown your level of intuition and innovation. Whatever happened with that situation last semester, whoever tried to convince you otherwise, they were deeply, fundamentally wrong about your capabilities. I didn't tell him how much I needed to hear that, how the validation from someone whose opinion I genuinely respected helped quiet the lingering doubts Vanessa had planted. The engineering department held an awards ceremony in early September, recognizing outstanding students from the previous academic year. I was nominated for the Whitman Excellence in Engineering Award, given to one junior student who demonstrated exceptional academic performance and research contributions. I almost didn't go to the ceremony, uncomfortable with public recognition after months of trying to stay under the radar, but Professor Kowalski insisted. "You've earned this," he said firmly, "and part of recovery is allowing yourself to be recognized for genuine achievements. Don't let what she did rob you of moments like this." So I went, sat in the auditorium surrounded by students and faculty and families, and listened as the department head, Dr. Lillian Cross, read through the list of accomplishments that apparently belonged to me. Top of the junior class. Published research accepted to a national conference. Exceptional contributions to Professor Vega's renewable energy project. When she announced my name as the award recipient and invited me to the stage, I felt my legs shake as I walked up the steps. The applause was real. The recognition was real. The trophy in my hands was solid and heavy and undeniably present. Standing at the podium, I was supposed to give a brief acceptance speech. I'd prepared something generic about hard work and great professors, but looking out at the audience, I saw Olivia and David and other students who'd been manipulated by Vanessa, all of them smiling at me with understanding that went beyond normal congratulations. "This award means more to me than I can easily express," I said, deviating from my planned remarks. "Not just because it recognizes academic achievement, but because it represents truth. For a long time, I was told a story about who I was as a student and what I was capable of, and that story was a lie designed to diminish me. Learning to trust the actual evidence of my capabilities over someone else's false narrative has been one of the hardest things I've ever done. So this award isn't just about grades or research. It's about having the courage to believe in your own reality, even when someone you love is trying to convince you that reality doesn't exist. Thank you to everyone who helped me find my way back to the truth. The applause that followed felt different, deeper, like people understood I was talking about something larger than academic excellence. Later that night, I got a message from an unknown number. Just 2 words. Congratulations. Deserved. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if it was from Vanessa, if she'd somehow gotten access to a phone from prison, or if it was someone else entirely. The message felt ambiguous, could be read as genuine acknowledgement or bitter sarcasm, and I realized I'd probably never know which she intended. Maybe both. Maybe she was capable of recognizing what she'd done while still resenting the consequences. I deleted the message without responding, blocked the number, and made a conscious choice not to let her have any more space in my head. She'd taken enough. She'd occupied enough of my mental energy, caused enough doubt, claimed enough of my emotional bandwidth. Whatever she felt about my success or her failures wasn't my problem to solve or my burden to carry anymore. Senior year started with a kind of freedom I'd never experienced before. No one was monitoring my work through a lens of manufactured concern. No one was subtly undermining my confidence or reframing my achievements as lucky accidents. I could trust my own judgment, believe my professor's feedback, accept opportunities without second-guessing whether I deserved them. The research project with Professor Vega expanded into my senior thesis, and we made breakthroughs that got written up in actual engineering journals, my name on publications before I'd even graduated. Companies started recruiting me for positions after graduation, top firms in renewable energy and sustainable technology, offering salaries that seemed surreal for someone who'd spent months believing they were barely qualified to remain in the program. Every interview, every offer, every recognition felt like evidence piling up against the fiction Vanessa had constructed, proof accumulating until the weight of reality finally crushed her lies completely. I graduated in May with highest honors, ranked second in the class of 238, having climbed from fourth through a combination of exceptional senior year performance and other students' slight declines. My parents came to graduation, proud and still slightly bewildered by the whole story they'd heard in pieces over the past year. "We always knew you were capable of this," my mother said, but I wondered if that was revisionist history, if they'd also absorbed some of Vanessa's narrative about my struggles during our phone calls those semesters when I'd sounded uncertain and anxious. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was standing in the hot sun wearing a cap and gown, holding a diploma that represented not just academic achievement, but survival, resilience, the reclamation of my own narrative from someone who'd tried to steal it. Professor Vega found me after the ceremony, shook my hand, told me the renewable energy firm where I'd accepted a job was lucky to have me. "You're going to do remarkable things," he said. "I have absolutely no doubt about that." A few weeks later, I was cleaning out my apartment before moving across the country for my new job when I found an old notebook from sophomore year, back when Vanessa and I were still studying together and I still believed her version of reality. The margins were filled with her handwritten comments on my work. "Check this, conceptual error. Revisit this section, you're missing the point. Good attempt, but incorrect approach." Looking at them now, with the clarity of distance and truth, I could see they were nonsense. My work had been correct. Her corrections were the errors, technical mistakes that would have led to wrong answers if I'd followed her advice. I'd been right all along, trusting my own understanding, but I'd let her convince me I was wrong because I valued her approval more than my own judgment. That was the core lesson, maybe, not just that someone had lied to me, but that I'd participated in the lie by surrendering my authority over my own reality. Recovery wasn't just about exposing her fraud. It was about learning to trust myself absolutely, to believe the evidence of my own competence even when someone I loved insisted otherwise. I never saw Vanessa again after the trial. I heard through the campus gossip network that she'd been released from prison after serving 14 months, that she'd moved back to her hometown somewhere in the Midwest, that she'd enrolled in community college under probation terms requiring her to continue education. I hoped she'd gotten therapy, hoped she'd figured out whatever drove her to tear other people down rather than addressing her own failures honestly, but mostly I tried not to think about her at all. She'd occupied enough of my life, shaped enough of my story. The rest of my narrative belonged to me alone, built on actual achievement and real relationships and hard-earned self-knowledge. I'd reclaimed my truth from someone who tried to bury it under lies, and that victory, quiet and personal and complete, mattered more than any award or recognition or public vindication. The research firm I joined specialized in large-scale renewable energy projects, exactly the kind of cutting-edge work I'd dreamed about when I first chose engineering as a major. On my first day, my supervisor, Dr. Anthony Sterling, reviewed my undergraduate research portfolio with an enthusiasm that would have seemed surreal 2 years earlier. "This solar efficiency work is genuinely innovative," he said. "Most new graduates have strong theoretical knowledge, but limited practical research experience. You're coming in with actual contributions to the field. That's rare and valuable." I accepted the compliment simply, without deflection or self-doubt, because I'd earned it, and I knew I'd earned it, and no one's opinion could convince me otherwise anymore. That certainty, that unshakable knowledge of my own capabilities, was the real education I'd gotten from the entire ordeal. Not just technical skills or academic credentials, but the hard-won understanding that my perception of reality was valid, that my judgment was sound, that I could trust myself even when others tried to make me doubt. Sometimes I think about that email, the one that arrived at 11:34 p.m. on a random Thursday and cracked open Vanessa's entire constructed reality. If she hadn't accidentally forwarded it to our shared laptop, how much longer would the lies have continued? Would I still be there, in that apartment, being slowly convinced of my own inadequacy while she spiraled further into fraud and deception? The randomness of discovery haunted me sometimes, the way massive life changes could hinge on tiny technical errors like an auto-forwarded email or a browser session left logged in. But maybe it wasn't random at all. Maybe lies that extensive eventually collapse under their own weight, truth working its way to the surface through whatever cracks appear in the carefully maintained fiction. The specific mechanism mattered less than the outcome. I'd found the truth, faced it, and survived the destruction of everything I'd thought I knew about someone I loved. A year after graduation, I presented my research at an international engineering conference in Geneva. Standing in front of hundreds of experts, discussing innovations I'd developed and tested and proven, I had a moment of almost out-of-body clarity. This was who I actually was, not the struggling student Vanessa had tried to convince me I was, but a capable engineer making real contributions to a field I loved. The recognition wasn't external validation I needed to feel complete. It was simply confirmation of a reality I'd learned to trust in myself. After the presentation, several researchers approached me with questions and collaboration ideas, treating me as a peer and expert rather than a junior professional still finding his footing. One of them, a professor from MIT, mentioned they were looking for PhD candidates for their renewable energy program and asked if I'd be interested in applying. I said yes, without hesitation, without that automatic voice in my head, questioning whether I was really qualified, whether I was fooling myself about my capabilities, whether someone smarter and more talented deserved the opportunity instead. The last I heard about Vanessa was from a mutual friend who'd stayed loosely connected to her post-prison. She'd completed her associate's degree at community college, was working in retail management, seemed to be living a quiet, unremarkable life, far from academia. No more fraud, no more manipulation, just ordinary existence that bore no resemblance to the brilliant engineering student she'd pretended to be. I felt nothing hearing this update, no satisfaction or pity or lingering anger, just a distant acknowledgement that she'd become a character in a story that had ended, someone who'd once significantly impacted my life, but no longer had any claim on my present or future. Her lies had shaped me, in ways both damaging and ultimately strengthening, but they didn't define me. What defined me was what I'd built after the lies collapsed. Genuine achievement, real relationships based on honesty, hard-won self-knowledge and trust. If I had to distill everything down to one lesson, it would be this. Trust your own reality, especially when someone you love insists it doesn't exist. The manipulation only worked because I valued Vanessa's perception over my own direct experience, because I accepted her authority to define my academic identity despite having clear evidence to the contrary. I had transcripts showing straight A's, but I believed her stories about flagged performance and disappointed professors. I had offers for prestigious research positions, but I believed her explanations about diversity quotas and mistaken emails. Every time my reality contradicted her narrative, I chose her narrative, and that choice nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. Recovery meant learning to trust the evidence of my own eyes, my own experience, my own capabilities, absolutely and without qualification. It meant understanding that love doesn't give someone the right to redefine your reality. That concern that consistently undermines your confidence isn't actually concern at all. That support that leaves you feeling smaller and more uncertain is the opposite of support. Years from now, when I tell this story, if I tell it at all, I won't focus on Vanessa's criminal charges or expulsion or prison sentence, the external markers of justice that seemed so important at the time. I'll talk about standing in Dr. Kowalski's office holding a forged document and finally understanding that I'd been living in an inverted reality for months. I'll talk about the slow, difficult process of reclaiming my own narrative from someone who'd tried to steal it. I'll talk about learning that the most important validation comes from your own honest assessment of your capabilities, not from someone else's strategic manipulation of your insecurities. And I'll talk about how sometimes the people who seem most supportive are actually the ones systematically destroying your foundation, and that recognizing that truth, however painful, is the first step toward building something real and lasting in its place. I got into MIT's PhD program. I accepted. I'm starting in the fall, working on renewable energy systems that might actually matter, might actually help solve real problems in the world. When I tell people about my research or my academic background, I don't mention Vanessa anymore. She's not part of the story I tell about myself, not a chapter that requires explanation or context. She was an obstacle I navigated, a problem I solved, a liar whose lies eventually collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. What matters is what I built on the other side of that collapse. A life based on reality instead of fiction, achievements earned through actual effort rather than manufactured perception, relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation. She tried to convince me I was falling behind. Turns out I was always ahead. I just had to learn to believe it. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.